A rite of passage, and this is rite, R-I-T-E, not R-I-G-H-T. A rite is a kind of ceremony or ritual. A rite of passage is a ceremony or ritual that marks a transition from one stage of life into another. I would hazard a guess that every indigenous religion has rites of passage for various things. So look for that as you're studying the different indigenous religions that you research or read about. What are the rites of passage? Some of them can be very painful. Rites of passage for young men, particularly in some native traditions of North America, involve pain. So there's the sun dance, and Mike Vargo, who I am hoping at some point will visit our class, has actually been through this, where it involves actually piercing the muscles on the chest, and then being suspended or having those muscles be pulled on by ropes for a long period of time. And then you're fasting, which means not eating. So you're hungry and you're in pain. And surviving that is part of becoming a man in those traditions. There's another group of people in South America, I forget what they're called, and this is bad. But when boys become men, they have to put their hands into these homemade gloves that are full of ants. Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And the ants sting the heck out of them. Find that video for extra credit and bring
It's
it
like,
in.
they're called like bullet ants. They're just
Yeah.
like
And
crazy.
they have to sit there with their hands in there. If you can find that video, extra credit. I'll take a look at it. So, and that I thought was a reliable source. I don't believe all the stuff I see on TV, but that one was believable. So, yes.
I don't know if you can help me out with this. I've seen videos of this, but there's rite of passage, I think in South America or in Africa, where boys have to do pole dance, climb up and down. Like, use their arm muscles to climb up these poles and slide back down and stuff to prove they have the strength for battle and stuff.
Find it. See if you can find it.
I tried to, but I look for it, I find other stuff, and so it's really hard. I only saw it once.
Research is challenging, especially when it comes to indigenous peoples. White people don't know a lot about this stuff. Westerners, I should say. We're just starting to learn about these traditions that are hundreds of years old, and oftentimes these people have been rather secluded. They don't necessarily want contact with the industrialized world, because that contact might just destroy and erode their culture. But this is an example of a rite of passage. It didn't involve any human pain. It did involve a small animal sacrifice. But what you're looking at is a kind of sacred space that's built within a traditional house. It's a wooden cubicle. It's maybe just the size of, I guess, about a quarter of this classroom. It's elevated up off the floor, so it's in the very center of the house. And it's built to exact proportions, like the measurements and the number of boards that are used. And then it's covered with traditional carvings that are so ancient, people don't really even know what they mean anymore. You can see some of the carvings here on the threshold. Kind of looks like water and boats sailing across water and some type of animal. But these are my kids. They're all inside this house. This was years ago, so that when they were little. And the rite of passage was to kind of initiate them into the tribe. So after this, they were members of the tribe. So it involved, here they are, bless you. This is when we were younger, my husband and one of my brothers-in-law, and then the 3 kids. Tired. So this is Pius, one of the elders, sacrificing a chicken. So they would slit its beak or slit its throat to let the blood run into a bowl, and we would eat it later. But then the blood was what was used for the rite of passage, to welcome new members into the tribe. So a rite of passage is any ritual that marks a transition from one state of life into another. Marriage is a rite of passage in our culture. Graduation is a rite of passage. That's why there's so much ceremony around it. You're moving into that part of society that's considered educated and professional. So graduation is a rite of passage that marks that transition. So then just a dot of chicken blood was placed on their foreheads. So sacrifice was part of this. You see that aspect of it. And it's a ritual that marks a transition into being members of this tribe. So it's a rite of passage. So it's one specific example. Again, if you were talking about this on an oral exam, you could say, the Bajawa people of Flores, Indonesia do this. So we're always talking about a specific group of people in a specific place and their specific practices as examples of larger main ideas. Another main idea in terms of indigenous religions is that for most, ancestors in the spirit world are very near. Spirits are real. the ancestors are really present to the community. So there's this sense of the nearness of the supernatural, the nearness of the spirit world. This is a cemetery that's close to the village. Anybody can walk there. Almost every village has a cemetery right nearby. A lot of people put graves right in front of their houses. Here's an example of the blending of Catholicism and an ancient indigenous religion, the lighting of candles, something Catholics do. People light candles and put them on the graves. So this is a grave that's right in front of a home. It symbolizes how close people feel the ancestors and their relatives who have passed away are. When my father-in-law, God rest his soul, passed away, people saw a lot of these kind of moths coming around the house. People think of them as the spirits of the ancestors. So this is kind of a blend of that idea of how the natural world and living things are seen as sacred, or even seen as kin, relatives. And it's the idea of the ancestors being present in these butterflies, beautiful and big butterflies that we're seeing around the house with the passing of my father-in-law. So ancestors in the spirit world are considered very near, and people, not quite so much in the Java anymore, but many indigenous peoples regard evil spirits as the source of illness. So if someone's sick, it's often attributed to an evil spirit. If you've read the New Testament, you've seen this in the Gospels. Jesus was always healing people who had various conditions, often by casting a demon out of them. So the belief that evil spirits cause illness is rather common among indigenous peoples. And then the remedy for that is some type of ritual, a ritual to heal the person or cast out the evil spirit. So good and bad things can be attributed to spirits. This brings me to another topic which students are often very interested in. A shaman is a spiritual healer. It is not necessarily universal, thank you, but it's rather common among indigenous peoples that there will be one person in the tribe or the community who's considered to have a special gift of healing. It's not something they sought out. It's not something they got a college degree for. But they're considered to have this ability to heal, often by connecting with or calling on the spirit world. Shamanism, I think, is common among indigenous peoples in Central Asia. Russia is thereabouts. The Yupik people of Alaska, and related groups of people in and around Siberia. So that the shaman might dress up as that spirit, that totem spirit, and find a way to contact the spirit world. Link, question?
It says eating mushrooms to
Yes.
induce visions.
That is why this fascinates college students. Hallucinogenic substances connect you with the spirit world. That's what they do, that's what they're for, in this context. And of course that can lead to legal questions that you might encounter in your professions if you move into law or law enforcement or criminal justice. How okay is it for people who are genuinely practicing an indigenous religion to use substances, whether it's mushrooms or peyote or something? There are other ways of getting into that kind of state of consciousness. Music and dance is another way. Music can induce a trance-like state in which people believe they're contacting the spirit world. So shamanism is something to look for as you read about the indigenous religions. You might want to research it in greater depth yourself. And this slide I pirated from students in another class who had put it together. They did a good job. Okay. Indigenous religions today are under threat. They're still here, and they still have valuable contributions to make, but their existence is tenuous. Globalization, meaning sort of the exporting of Western industrial technologized culture and infrastructure and economic systems to other places. So in Flores, for example, the cash economy is flowing in. So many people, instead of wanting to farm the land, which is a very hard existence, they want to go get a job and make money. And that's changing everything. So globalization is changing these societies economically and technologically. Everybody in Flores, there are virtually no landlines in the village. Everybody has a cell phone. They got cell phones before we did. So now you see these people sitting around the fire in a kitchen with a dirt floor on their cell phones. It's the most incongruous thing I've ever seen. And so now people are starting to spend more time on Facebook communicating with people who are hundreds of miles away instead of interacting with each other and continuing to solidify this family bond. Yeah. This is where we can start to be critical of our culture. There are many good things about our culture as it is. Our lives are much easier because of all of our technologies. But there are some destructive things about it too. So technology, globalization, those things are kind of eroding indigenous religions today. Urbanization, the formation of big cities, the small villages are really crucial to the existence of an indigenous religion. Western education, so when you yank a kid out of their family and stick them in a school, you're interrupting that oral tradition process. So families are less able to pass on their morals, their hunting and farming and fishing practices, their languages to their children, because the children are gone for 6 hours a day. So what we call education, yanking a kid out of the family and sticking him in a school, is actually anti-education in this context. So we have to be very careful how we balance these things. You want people to be able to read and write, but you don't want to take away their culture. And of course our capitalist economy, which is just pretty much raping the planet. You know, like in Flores, for example, there's gold. And there's a big Chinese conglomerate that wants to get in there and mine the gold. Gold mining is incredibly destructive. It poisons the water. It destroys people's lives. So there are organizations, churches, and groups of people who are trying to keep that company out, but it's a hard battle to fight. So the use of natural resources in our capitalist economy is harming indigenous peoples everywhere. But many are finding their voice and reclaiming their traditions. The United Nations, I want you to be aware of, the United Nations had produced a document called the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's really important to be aware of. So multiple countries have signed on to this declaration, including the United States and Canada, where they promise to respect the rights of indigenous peoples to their land, to their culture, to their beliefs, to their way of life. So indigenous peoples, as such, have rights.
So then the pipeline?
Yes, you would think. But will we allow the United Nations to step in here? That would be interesting. That would be a great research project, though. I don't know. There are some parts of it we don't contribute to at all, like the International Criminal Court. So Donald Trump supposedly signed an executive order saying we're not going to fund the ICC anymore. Well, we don't fund it anymore. But we do contribute a lot to other things. So that would be a wonderful research topic for you. If anyone's interested in international law, United Nations, and how it impacts religion and religious observances around the world, would be an interesting topic. Okay. Other questions on this? I want to go back to the idea of double belonging. So my relatives, for example, practice these ancient beliefs and rituals alongside of Catholicism. They're as Catholic as anybody, maybe more so, just steeped in Catholicism. So indigenous peoples often practice a world religion alongside of their ancient religions together, and sometimes that's called double belonging. And you can see, if we look at the world religions today, like Hinduism or Christianity, you can see the influence of indigenous peoples on this as present religions. Our Lady of Guadalupe is a wonderful example. She's a Catholic figure, and yet has an indigenous background. The story behind Our Lady of Guadalupe is that I think it was in the 1500s, Mary appeared to an indigenous person in Mexico, named Juan Diego. She appeared to him miraculously. She left an image, a picture on his robe, and then he showed that robe to the bishop as proof that he had seen her. And this is now, the tilma, or the robe, is now enshrined in a basilica in Mexico. And thousands of people come to this as a pilgrimage site to honor Our Lady of Guadalupe. It's a better picture of the image itself, a sacred image. So this is a really wonderful example of the coexistence and co-influence of indigenous traditions on the great global religions. In the reading on Afro-Caribbean traditions, the writers, I think, try to point out the deep influence that many African traditions have had on Christianity. The experience, for example, of being sort of infused with the Holy Spirit is something that's a deeply African experience that you see there. So that would be an interesting research topic for anyone who wants to go deeper into this. Before we wrap up, are there questions? Either questions about this talk or this topic, or questions about your homework? I'm going to give you a journal entry, then we'll have more time to talk about midterms.
I was going to skip career class or a meeting. not dropping a class or anything, I recently moved living
Oh.
spaces, so.
Oh, you just wanna see me one on one
Yeah,
after
I
class?
just, yeah.
Sure, grab me, okay. Anything else? We can continue to talk while you write. Part of the purpose of the journal entries,
Good journal guide.
yes. Did you see it?
Fully together.
If you don't see it, it must still be in my office, I will get another workout and run back up there. So part of the purpose of journaling during class is for you to capture the knowledge you've gained right now. The thoughts, the ideas you have, the questions you still have. Get that in a paragraph. Just give me a substantial paragraph. 5 to 7 sentences is enough. But really substantial, like what have you learned today? That you didn't know before. So you're telling me you got something out of the lecture? You're also capturing knowledge so that you don't forget it or lose it when you walk out. And then you can come back to that to study. The more you put in this journal entry, the better. Extra credit is always possible for assignments that go above and beyond expectations. So capture what you learned today. And any question that you still have. An idea for further research that you might like to do, that you could pursue. So spend a few minutes working on this, and then we'll go over upcoming assignments.